Why do some people go completely silent when they're hurt? Like something inside them just shuts down. What's actually happening in their mind when they stop explaining, stop reacting, and just disappear emotionally? And what if that silence isn't weakness at all, but a sign that they've felt too much for too long? Because I've noticed something about the people who go quiet when they're in pain, something most people completely misread. And once I understood what that silence is actually carrying, it changed the way I see everything.
There's a specific kind of person, and I think you might recognize them. They don't slam doors, they don't raise their voice, they don't send the long emotional message at 2 a.m. explaining every detail of how they feel. When something cuts them deep, they just go still. They pull back. They get calm in a way that doesn't feel like calm at all. They respond shorter. They stop initiating. And if you're not paying close attention, you might miss that anything happened at all. But something did happen. Something significant. And the silence is the only evidence they're willing to leave behind. Here's what most people assume when someone goes quiet after being hurt. They think it's manipulation. They think it's a game. They think the person is being dramatic, making a big deal out of nothing by saying nothing. But that assumption misses the entire psychology of what's actually taking place. Because that silence, it isn't emptiness. It's a language. And it's one of the most loaded, emotionally dense languages a person can speak. I want to explain what's actually happening inside someone when they shut down like this, because it doesn't begin in the moment they go silent. It begins long before that. People who go quiet when hurt, most of them learned something early. They learned that expressing pain out loud wasn't safe. Maybe they were dismissed when they cried. Maybe they were told they were too sensitive. Maybe they opened up once, fully, completely, and the person they trusted either minimized it, used it against them, or simply didn't care enough to hold it with care. So the nervous system remembered. It filed that experience away like a survival note. Expressing this pain out loud leads to more pain. And slowly, almost without realizing it, they started sealing things inward. Not because they didn't feel, but because they felt too much and the world gave them nowhere safe to put it. That silence isn't absence, it's accumulated evidence. Every time they swallowed something, every time they smiled through something that broke them, every time they said, "I'm fine," when they were the opposite of fine. It all got stored somewhere internal, quiet, heavy, and invisible to everyone around them. And when the next wound comes, the system doesn't even deliberate. It just closes, because closing is the only protection it ever learned to trust.
And here's where it gets deeply interesting. Because what looks like withdrawal from the outside is actually an act of profound self-containment on the inside. These people aren't shutting others out carelessly. They're protecting themselves from a very specific kind of devastation. The devastation of being vulnerable and being met with nothing. I've come to understand that for people who go silent when hurt, the fear isn't just about the pain itself. It's about what happens if they show the pain and it doesn't matter to the other person. That specific experience of being visibly broken and being met with indifference is something their system has classified as catastrophic. So silence becomes control. Not manipulation, control. There's a profound difference. When everything feels like it's falling apart emotionally, silence is the one thing they can govern. They can't control whether someone cares. They can't control whether someone understands. but they can control whether or not they expose the wound, and so they choose containment every time. It's not coldness, it's armor, and armor doesn't get built overnight.
But the real thing that most people never see, and this is the part I find most striking, is what that silence is actually asking for. Because people who go quiet when hurt are not asking to be left alone. They are waiting to be reached for anyway. There's a distinction there that changes everything. The silence is not a wall. It's a test of something they've been burned by before. The question of whether anyone will care enough to look past the quiet exterior and ask what's really happening underneath. They won't ask for comfort directly. That would require the kind of vulnerability their system has already decided is dangerous. But somewhere in that stillness, there is a part of them, a very human, very tender part that is hoping someone will notice, that someone will sit beside the silence instead of being confused or irritated by it. And when no one does, when the silence is taken at face value, when people assume they seem fine, it doesn't just hurt, it confirms the oldest wound they carry, that they are alone in what they feel, that they always have been.
This is where the pattern carves something permanent into a person's identity. Because after years of going silent and not being reached for, after years of containing everything internally while the world moves on unbothered, something settles inside them. A quiet but iron-solid belief. I handle things alone. That's just who I am. And they start wearing that like a badge. Self-sufficiency becomes identity. Independence becomes armor they've stopped questioning. They stop expecting anyone to ask. They stop waiting to be reached for. They build a version of themselves that doesn't need, because needing and not receiving is a pain I think few things in human psychology rival. But beneath that identity, beneath the composed exterior and the "I'm fine," and the eerie calm when everything inside is fracturing, there is still someone who wants to be known, someone who wants to say, "I'm not okay," and be held in that without having to justify it. Someone who learned to be silent not because silence felt natural, but because it felt necessary. That's not strength. That's survival dressed up as strength, and there's a difference that matters deeply.
So when I see someone go quiet after being hurt, I don't see withdrawal anymore. I see a person whose history taught them that the safest place for pain is inside. I see someone who once spoke and wasn't heard, and decided, consciously or not, that silence was more dignified than vulnerability left unwitnessed. I see someone who is communicating everything by saying nothing. The silence of a hurt person is one of the most misunderstood signals in human behavior. It doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean nothing happened. It doesn't mean they've moved on. It means something happened that felt too significant to risk being dismissed. It means they've been here before, and they remember how it ended. Once I understood that, really understood it, I couldn't look at someone's quiet the same way again. Because silence in the right context isn't the absence of feeling. It's feeling so full there are no words left that feel safe enough. And that awareness alone changes how I read every room I walk into. It was never random. It was never just a mood. It was never nothing. It was always a pattern. And now I see it. If this explained something I've been carrying quietly, there's more to uncover. Understanding the patterns beneath the surface is where everything begins to make sense.